Miss First Class Life herself, Lindsey Vertner, and she's the host of the podcast First Class Life and the author of First Class Life. And we met on her podcast, but oh my gosh, the alignment just outrageous. Like every time we talk, we're like, yeah, me too. Yeah, me too. Me too. And one of you guys know I talk about designing a life you're excited about living, which is a first class life. So, Lindsey, welcome to Toxic Person Proof. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
I love it. So, why don't you explain what you think a first class life is?
All right. So, creating a first class life full of purpose, fulfillment, and happiness is all about the life you are, like I said, creating for yourself. It is about being intentional in every moment that you can to create happiness, to create moments of joy, to create a living legacy, not only for you, but for everyone connected to you, because it has a positive ripple effect. It's about shedding away the mask that we put on when we wake up. You know the ones: mask of shame, fear, doubt, perfectionism, not feeling good enough, all of those different things that we wear day in and day out, trying to live up to the expectations of other people, and instead boldly and authentically walking as who you are, flaws and all. So that is what creating a first class life is all about. Really, truly, and genuinely creating a life full of purpose, fulfillment, and happiness.
And I want to zero in on what you talked about as far as that leaving a legacy and the ripple effect, right? Because I think there's still people who kind of have in their head, like, is it selfish to try to be happy? Is it selfish self-care? Right? All those. And I know you've got some very strong feelings on this. And so do I do. So explain what you mean by that ripple effect.
Yes. So we often like to think of self-care as being selfish, and society makes us feel that way. Like when we treat ourselves to something that only satisfies us, or when we take a vacation just for us, or do something that is just for us, society will make us feel like, oh, well, you're selfish. Like, why aren't you putting your kids first, or putting your career first, or putting ... first? That's what you should be doing. But what we don't realize is that whenever we put ourselves last, we are subconsciously telling ourselves that we aren't worthy of our goals, of our dreams. And it starts to take a toll on us mentally, emotionally, physically. And I like to think of self-care is giving the world the best of you instead of what's left of you. So if you think you're doing a great job right now, then just think how much more impactful you would be if you were operating at 100 instead of operating at 10. And so that's what we have to think about, because when we are showing up as our best, mentally, emotionally, physically, in all of the different ways, then we make a greater impact on the people around us.
And, I know we both have daughters, right? And when people kind of go into the self-care is selfish thing, I was like, well, do you think I'm a bad mother for making sure my daughter has the education she deserves, making sure she has food that's good for her body, making sure she goes to bed early, especially if she has a test at school, making sure that she gets to be around her friends and do you think I'm a bad mother for that? And they're like, well, no. And I was like, okay, so at what point does my daughter expire? Right? Because if her hobbies, growth, education, all that stuff is really important now, at what point does she expire?
Mm-hmm.
You're telling me if it's not okay for women to do that, that at some point I have to look my daughter in the face and say, game's up, honey. You're done. Right?
Yes.
And I think it pulls a flip on that, because it's really ugly to think about telling my daughter that she expires. I'm like, then why are you telling yourself you're expired?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that. What point do you expire?
Right. And I will never forget, I was at a Mother's Day baseball tournament, and it was 10 o'clock at night, and we were still at the baseball field, and I was like, rage, and I was like talking to another mother about it, and I said, does anyone think this is like maybe something's wrong with this picture? Like, does anybody feel like maybe something's wrong? And she said, well, I don't care. I'm happy to be, even it doesn't matter if it's Mother's Day, it's still my son's day. It's all about him. And it's all about, and I know in her head, she thought, well, that was made her a good mother. And my thought was, I hope my daughter never dates your son.
Yeah.
Because if he still grows up and he thinks Mother's Day is also his day.
Right.
Right.
Yes, because we are taken for granted so often. Like we don't even realize the problem anymore because it's such ingrained into us and it becomes routine. It becomes our normal, but really it's not normal. We have to put ourselves first so that we can continue to show up for baseball games, so that we continue to be able to focus and think creatively on ways to build generational wealth so that we can provide the activities that are an arm and a leg, right? So that we can provide the good food, the good housing, and the things that we desire to provide for our kids. Because whenever we are draining and exhausting and drowning ourselves and saying, oh yes, I'm going to still show up even though I'm exhausted my own self, then eventually our body is going to shut us down for us. And usually that happens at the most inconvenient of times. And then we literally can't do anything because we're having a nervous breakdown. We are depressed or anxious, or, I've seen it on the extreme end of things where one day you're fine and the next you're going through the motions, you end up suicidal. And with my background in therapy, like I said, I've seen it happen because oftentimes women will be quick to say, oh, that will never happen to me until it does. And I've seen it happen enough times to many women. And so we have to be proactive and preventative rather than reactive.
And Lindsey, I told you my own story about blacking out while I was driving, right? And so that was my who thinks that's going to happen to them, right? And it's like, okay, I'm not a superhero. Like, I'm not God. I'm just a mere mortal. Sorry, everyone, and so I certainly understand. Another thing that women really struggle with, we talked about the self-care piece, and I know they also struggle if someone says, what do you want?
Mm-hmm.
Right? That seems like a very difficult question for women to answer. And I think you have a strategy around that, right?
I do. And before I get into this strategy, is it okay if I take it back for a moment and tell you kind of how it all came into play? So in May of 2007, I found myself waking up in complete darkness. I had no clue where I was. I went to move and I couldn't move. I went to speak and I couldn't speak. I couldn't see anything around me. And I started to panic, like, because what else do you do in a time like that? Don't know where I'm at, can't see, can't speak, can't move. And I panicked so much that eventually I exhausted myself out to the point where I passed out. And the next time I woke up, I was thinking like, that was a crazy nightmare. And I hope to never experience it again because it felt so real. It felt so lifelike. And I slowly realized that I still didn't know where I was. I still couldn't see, still couldn't speak, still couldn't move. The only thing that had changed was now the sunlight was shining through a window where the moonlight was previously shining. That was the only thing that had changed. And so before I could panic again, a lady walks up to me and she starts asking me questions. And to make a long story short, turns out this lady is my nurse. And she proceeds to tell me that an entire week earlier, on May 13th, 2007, the car I was driving went off the opposite side of the highway, flipped multiple times before landing upside down. My head was pinned between the ground and the entire weight of the car on top of me. I was cut from the car and immediately pronounced brain dead on the scene. They lifelined me by helicopter to a trauma hospital where, again, by a new set of medical professionals, mind you, I was pronounced brain dead upon arrival. But God in that moment, because despite putting me in plastic, they proceeded to do emergency surgeries anyway. And the only reason they placed me on life support was until my family could be contacted. So I was like, wait. 1 minute, I'm minding my business, driving home from visiting my mother on Mother's Day. And the next, I'm waking up to being told that not only had I been brain dead for the past week, but amongst a long list of injuries, I was also paralyzed. So talk about a complete flip on my life. And it was in that moment that I recognized I could either be a victim to my circumstances or be a victor over my obstacles. And because I'm here in front of you today, I chose the latter, but it took a lot of work. It took a lot of patience. And luckily, I figured out it took some self-care among some other things. But I said all that to say because I found myself trying to live up to the expectations of other people. And one of the articles that was written about me, front page news, big headline said, "Miracle on the highway. Woman believed dead is now alive in Indianapolis hospital." And so I was trying to live up to being that miracle. And I had people call me Miracle Woman and Walking Miracle. And that was a lot of pressure. And to be honest, I didn't feel good enough to be that person. So what was I doing? I was doing all the things for all the people all the time. I was trying to show up for everybody. I was putting my needs last, thinking that I'm just being the best human possible. Like, yes, I'll show up for you. And yes, I'll do this for you. And yes, I am living up to this expectation that you have placed up on me. And that was whenever the flip really switched personally, because I had a breakdown. I had a breakdown moment where I was just like, I can't do this anymore. I was averaging just 2 or 3 hours of sleep, and I couldn't think about what I wanted because my brain was so cluttered with everybody else's wants and needs. And that's where self-care comes into play, because it can help to declutter our brain and give us the space to focus on what is important to us, give us the space to be productive and effective on the goals that we are working with. Because when we're so cluttered with everybody else, it's hard to really identify, well, what do I want anyway? Which is one reason why a lot of women don't focus on what they want, because they're too focused on everything else. And when they sit down and think about it, they don't know. And so that's why I had to share that little story, so you can have a better understanding. Like, we have to be who we are called to be and live up to those expectations and not the expectations of other people and who they desire us to be. So that is,
which is hard.
Yes.
Which is hard. I thank you so much for telling that story, but I want to jump in, and because I think it does get easier for sure. But I know if you have struggled with people pleasing or struggled with having everyone else's wants and needs crowded up in your head, I do want to be real. I know in your podcast, you're all about, like, let's say the real stuff, right? And I want to, in a real way, say, it's hard. You know what was fun? Everybody liking me, everybody agreeing with everything I said, being like the popular one because I was so nice and I would put up with people's bad behavior. Like, it wasn't really fun, but there were certain aspects of it that were very fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? And,
definitely.
oh, Sarah's so thoughtful. She's so nice. She's so this. Because your wants and needs and desires, everything are always more important than mine. I'm sure that was really fun for you.
Mm-hmm. You don't want people mad at you because you said no.
Right. And, so I want to say it is hard and it is possible. Both are true.
Yes. So in thinking about what is it do I really want, you first have to ask yourself that question. Okay, what do I want? And so, for example, somebody might say, well, I want to be financially free. Okay. So then you ask again, why do you want to be financially free? Well, I want to be financially free so that I don't have to worry about paying my bills and struggle paycheck to paycheck. Okay. Why don't you want to worry about paying your bills paycheck to paycheck to paycheck? Well, I don't want to have to worry about living paycheck to paycheck because then I can't afford my child's extracurricular activity. Okay. Why do you want to be able to afford your child's extracurricular? And you just keep going. You take every answer and say, okay, why this? And you keep going until you get down to the very, very meat and potatoes of why it is that you want to be financially free. Because if you just say, oh, I want to be financially free, that's not big enough for you to change your behaviors, for you to change your lack of self-care. You're just going to keep going in the same cycles you've already been doing. But when you connect it down to the thing that makes you emotional inside, like literally can bring tears to your eyes, that's what you want to focus on. Okay, that is why you're doing all of the things that you're doing or not doing. So does that make sense?
I love it. And if anybody has read my book, Problem Solved, you hear me talk about the 7-level problem solving, right? Because and this is where we connected on this, because, in my own life, what does financial freedom mean to me? It means more choices to protect my children.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's what it means to me, right? That's all I care about. I don't care about what a car I drive or how big my house is, right? But I do care that when my daughter was going through COVID, I could get her a reading tutor.
Mm-hmm.
Which is what I did, right? I care a whole lot about that, right? I care about that, and it was a wonderful thing. And her teacher is wonderful. It just, the world blew up, and she was in, she didn't have reading for a year, right? That's a problem, right? And then I think her reading tutor was like $450 a month. I mean, it was expensive, but worth it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just worth it, right? And, but so in that thing, that would be my bottom choice, or somewhere in the bottom, right? And so the 7-level problem solving, what problem are you trying to solve? I want to have financial freedom. What problem am I really trying to solve? Well, I want to be able to support my kids. What problem are you really trying to solve? I want to be present with my kids and not focused on money. What problem are you really trying to solve? Right. Or whatever it is. And guys, the world is so fast paced, the faster we go, it's more surface.
Mm-hmm.
When you take and this is a very short exercise, right, Lindsey?
Yes. Easy to do.
You can, do you have 15 minutes to figure out really what motivates you to solve one of the biggest problems of your life, or figure out what you really want?
Mm-hmm.
It's worth it.
Very much so, because if it doesn't drive you emotionally, then it's easy to just toss it to the wind. It's easy to give up whenever obstacles come, because life is going to keep lifing, okay? We all experience life. We all experience some level of struggle or obstacles that come along throughout our lifetimes, and that's not going to change. And so despite this obstacle that's in front of me, what is going to keep me going? Because our feelings will lie to us, and our feelings will make us give up. Our feelings will say, all right, I don't feel like this, or I don't feel like I have the support, or I don't feel like I have the money, ... But one thing I always say is that where your focus goes, your energy flows. And so whatever you focus on, you attract more of into your life. So when you don't feel like you have the money, support, education, title, whatever it is that you're using, then you're only attracting more of the same. Your brain is coming up with evidence to determine and to complete that thought. It is giving you the evidence to prove that what you are thinking is right. And so we have to flip the switch and say, okay, this is what I desire. This is what moves me. It makes me emotional. And this is what I care about. And I'm willing to do any and everything that it takes, despite my feelings, despite what it looks like in front of me. We have to be forward focused and focused on the vision that we desire for ourselves, and know that it's going to all work out as long as I'm showing up the way that I need to show up. But I can't do all of those things if I am always putting myself last.
Because there's not enough gas in the tank.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I know something you and I both agree on is that life's going to keep lifing, right? So there's going to be some moment that, crap's going to hit the fan, or what, it's like, whoa, I never saw this coming.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it be a great thing or a really hard thing. You might have a great opportunity, and it's like, oh, I wish I had shown up as my best self for that, but I was exhausted. Right. Or I wish I had, or a tragedy. Right. And I wish I need to make really serious decisions right now. And I'm going into it already exhausted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm just overwhelmed because it's Tuesday. much less something comes in my life and then it's like I have to make a decision about. Right?
Yes, yes, it is so true.
And so we don't get to choose when we reach the end of our rope, but we can take a lot of practical steps in lengthening our rope.
Exactly, exactly. I like to use the analogy of cars. So we all know like a luxury car versus like a beat down, broke down hoopty, right? Where every stoplight or stop sign, you're like, please go again when I hit the gas. Or like you got to get in through the passenger side. You got to roll down the windows, like the AC doesn't work and it's 90 degrees in the summer. Like it'll
Mhm.
still get us from point A to point B, but it's how do we want to arrive to point B? Versus in the brand new luxury car, it's like you don't got to worry about the gas, you don't got to worry about the AC, you got Sirius XM radio, still get you there, but it's a more enjoyable experience, right? It's less stress that we have to worry about getting to our final destination. But with either car, what do you have to do? Sometimes you have to put gas in it every now and then, like every 3 months or something, you got to get an oil change. Maybe once a year, you get your tires rotated. Every other year, maybe you get a tune up. You have different areas of maintenance to keep that car running.
Mhm.
And you can choose not to do those maintenance, but eventually, what's going to happen is the car won't move, period. It's going to
Mhm.
stop and break down, whether you want it to or not. And
Mhm.
so we have to think of our bodies and our brains as our metaphorical car. And then self care and the things that we do consistently each and every day is the maintenance to keep our bodies going. Some things we do daily, some things we do periodically, some things we do annually, but that's what helps us to maintain and to keep going, to keep serving, to keep showing up as the leaders we are.
So what is your favorite strategy for self-care?
So one thing I like to have everybody do is take a list of paper, take a sheet of paper, and then make a list, number it 1 through 50. And if I'm really pushing you, I'm usually going to tell you to go 100, 200, but we'll start with 50 for now, 50. And then write down every single thing that brings you joy, happiness, peace, relaxation. Think about only yourself. Don't think about, oh, well, I don't know, such and such doesn't like it when I do this. This ain't about such and such. This is about you. Do you like it? Okay, write it down. And what will happen is you will start to get to write in and you're like, okay, I'm going. And then you look at the number and you're like, oh, I'm only on 10. And so it really forces you to sit and think about, well, what do I like? Oh, you know what? I used to like doing crossword puzzles, or I used to read a lot and I've gotten away from that. And so it really forces you to sit down and think about yourself. What brings you peace, joy, and happiness? And so then once you have that list, you put it in your toolbox because sometimes it's hard to do things whenever we haven't thought about it in a long time. So when we need it in the moment, we can't think of it. And so we just keep going without it. But now it's like, all right, now I have this list and I'm feeling a little exhausted today. So let me pull out my list and see what can I do in the 5 minute break that I have? Okay. Okay, I can read a few pages of my book for 5 minutes to kind of recenter and reground myself. Or a
Mhm.
different day, like, oh, I'm feeling really agitated. Everybody's been getting on my nerves. I need to regroup. We can go to that list. Okay, I've got an hour. What can I do in this hour? And it gives you the opportunity to focus on yourself. And sometimes we think out of sight, out of mind, but this brings it to the forefront and you can easily see, all right, these only take a few minutes. These take a little more planning. This is free. This I might have to budget for. And then you can have those available to you when you have those moments where you just need to regroup and take some time for yourself. So I highly suggest getting some type of self-care, even if it's as little as 5 minutes every single day. And then, having those moments where you have that larger amount of time.
And it's not 5 minutes to scroll on your phone,
Right.
right? Because I think, sometimes there's some confusion about, like, numbing out and then self-care,
Mm-hmm. Two
right?
different things.
2 different things, right? And it's similar, right? Because it's just habit, like, okay, what am I, whatever. But just to distinguish, if it's a numbing activity, that is not a self-care activity, right?
Correct. Yes, that is very correct. So things that actually make you feel refreshed and rejuvenated. And we have to be careful with social media in general because a lot of people are putting on the perfect image on their social media, which makes us feel worse sometimes, depending on where we're at in our life. So being mindful of that. And then one other thing I want us to be mindful of is that self-care isn't always pretty. Like it's not always going on a shopping spree or going to the spa or things like that. Sometimes self-care is going to therapy. It is healing our past traumas. It is establishing and maintaining boundaries with the other people in our lives. It is saying no, period. That's the end of the sentence. No explanation needed. But if somebody asks you to do something that you don't want to do, or you're not comfortable doing, or doesn't align with your values, saying no and being okay with however they react to that, because you are protecting your peace.
Yes, love it, Lindsey. And I know people would love to find out more about you. So where can they get your book, listen to your podcast, all that good stuff?
Yes, you can find me on all of the things at Lindsey Vertner, Lindsey, V as in Victor, Ertner. So on all the social medias, I'm at Lindsey Vertner. You can get my book, First Class Life, 10 Key Factors to Creating a Life Full of Purpose, Fulfillment, and Happiness at firstclasslifeshop.com. And listen, I got a little free gift for all of the viewers and listeners. Okay. So I am all about taking action right now. We don't need to wait. We need to do it right now because I'm living proof that we are not promised tomorrow. Okay. So you can go to takeactiondownload.com to download your free action plan guide, and it'll literally walk you through step by step on creating a goal that you are working towards, but in an effective way that you're actually more likely to take action towards it. So takeactiondownload.com is where you can find that.
And we will put all that in the show notes. Lindsey, you'll have to come back on. I know both of us, every time we talk, it's like, okay, this cannot be the last conversation. It might probably die on the action comment. On your podcast, I said action was my number one thing that I picked up on, right? And so this will be the last you hear from Sarah and Lindsey conversations for sure. But you guys check her out, check out the stuff in the show notes, and thank you for helping us learn how to have a first-class life, take care of ourselves, and of course become toxic person proof.